So what I will do today is talk about do's and don'ts for founding teams with a lens through time. And the next couple slides, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. As Marianne said, I've been around a while. So I did my undergrad, master's, PhD at UC Berkeley and MIT. And along the ways, I joined Oracle in 1989. They were 800 people, right? That company was at that point too large for me, so I moved to a smaller company, TCSI. In Berkeley, there were 120 people, and the company went public. So that's what gave me the entrepreneurial bug. So my first startup was Hotelnet. We were building SMS applications for wireless handsets. This was the dot-com era. Subsequently, we saw RFID. We built a supply chain solution company. It was an IoT company in the cloud. And right now I'm working on my third startup, 11 side, which is voice AI agents that augment customer facing entry level positions. But in parallel, I also teach entrepreneurship and innovation at UC Berkeley and at Northeastern. So currently, I also have a position at Northeastern where I have also recently hosted several panel discussions with different founders. So what I have brought today to this discussion is a set of do's and don'ts that I have learned over the years, but these things also change, right? So nothing remains the same. So while on one hand, like this Confucius, and when I'm teaching, this is like one of my first slides, is every time you do a new startup, every time you talk to people about it, it's not just the first time you do it, but every time you repeat, you learn something new. I mean, even just preparing for this presentation today, as I put my slide deck together, certain things sort of got rearranged in my head of, okay, what are the things that haven't changed and what are the things that have? Now, here's a question. Who knows this movie Startup, The Things Change? Has anybody seen it? No? So it's one of my favorite movies. I actually also use it in day-to-day life, is that what was correct yesterday isn't necessarily correct today, right? And I mean, that's particularly important because we are living at a time where things are accelerating. I mean, with the advent of AI, things that would take months or years to develop, now you can almost build over a weekend, right? And some of you may remember the dot-com era where internet first came about, and all of a sudden everybody was selling something on internet that translated into social media, and it literally transformed the way we work. Now, one of the things that I ask my students to watch is this movie startup.com. And if you haven't watched it, if you don't know it, I recommend you will find it on YouTube. So the story, that movie is from 2000, 2001 era. And two founders are working on a company that is gonna enable people to pay their parking tickets online, right? I mean, today that's sort of an understood thing, and I haven't actually written a check for ages. It's like everything gets done online. But that company raises 17 million. They have a meteoric rise. They even have meetings with the then president, Bill Clinton, and ultimately they crash and burn. Now, why does that happen? For two reasons. One is the technology never really works, their website never works. But the number two is the team communication never works, right? They ultimately don't know how to run a team, how to run a company as a team. So, what I will do in these upcoming slides is, as I give the advice, or if I like tell you stories of the do's and don'ts, I will try to emphasize, okay, what is changing, what is not. Now, last month I was in a panel discussion, and Andreas Weigand, who is a good friend, who is also a serial entrepreneur, was on the panel, and he has consulted for many people, including Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. And he was telling us that what Jeff Bezos was more interested in was what isn't changing as opposed to what it is, because things that are changing are likely to going to change again, whereas things that aren't changing, these are sort of inherent complexities, people issues. Those are the ones you really need to focus on, because there is nothing that's going to help you with those problems down the line. So the first slide I'm going to talk about, this is by a gentleman by Larry Keeley. What Larry did is he said, look, innovation is not that complicated. There are 10 types of innovation, and I'm not going to cover everything here, but he then grouped it into three chunks. He said configuration, which is profit model, the supply chain, the internal processes, the way the company is organized, which is primarily business school people and maybe industrial engineering operations research people. He then said there is product and system innovation, which is basically engineers and scientists building new things. So as AI arrives, all of a sudden that creates a whole bunch of opportunities for new products. And then he said there is the experience, which is how do you brand yourself? How is your customer perceiving you? And do you sell directly? Do you sell through a channel? So if I look at this, it becomes immediately clear that if you are building a team, you definitely need a diverse team. And we're going to come into the teams in a minute, but Larry Keeley basically says that for any startup to succeed, you need at least 5, 6 of these categories that your team is focusing on, and ideally one of each, so that you build a successful company. So if you are out there thinking about your next startup, do basically have a closer look at this and say, okay, where is our differentiation? Because these 10 types, it's really never going to change. This applied 10 years ago, it applied 20 years ago, and it will apply in the next 10 years. Now, with that, I encourage you guys to look at what your edge is in your company. Now, maybe you have a technical or solution edge, which will also translate into a technical and solution risk, right? Because nobody else can build this, because I just did my PhD in the VR lab at UC Berkeley, or I worked on CRISPR gene editing at Harvard. I know how to build this type of thing, right? So I definitely have advised teams that wanted to really create through gene editing orange seeds that would grow in the tundra and still would be pesticide resistant. So it's like growing, solving cancer or curing cancer, curing AIDS. These are all problems that if you solve, you know you have it made. But there are also, and this I'm going to go back to, it's like the experience, right? So maybe your product is nothing new, but you are going to market with a different segmentation, with a different messaging. You are going after a neglected market. Like I guess Gerald was saying, hey, nobody is paying any attention to prisoners. I'm going to build services for them. It's not that they can't be built, it's nobody is building it. So he is going to have a market differentiation in the customers and users he is trying to serve. So if you are doing a startup, sort of look at it where your differentiation is falling in. And you do need to pick a methodology. I'm sure you guys have all heard of design thinking, lean, agile, innovation engineering, waterfall. I'm not going to cover that. Make sure that you are customer centric, but I would discourage you from building a startup where there is no technical or social solution innovation, nor any market innovation, right? I mean, you can build buildings, ships, etc. Incumbents will be doing a lot better than you. So you either need to bring a technical or solution edge or a market segmentation customer experience edge. I would advise again taking both of those risks at the same time because I mean we know Google Glass. It came in and it neither really worked right nor did we feel like wearing the Google Glass. It just didn't feel reasonable. Now, I'm sure you guys all have been told and heard before that always start with a problem, right? Now, given that everybody's video is off, I'm not going to ask you to answer that question, but I'm going to disagree with that. I would say never start with a problem, never start with a solution, but start with a problem and solution space. Because the problem you are starting with is unlikely a real problem. The first problem you focus on is probably not right. But if you apply some methodology, if you talk to a whole bunch of customers, as you let them tell you what their problems are, you will discover a problem that you and ideally your team can solve and solve better. And that journey through the problem and solution space is never going to be a smooth linear line. You're going to make 3 steps forward. You're going to think that, yes, this is the problem solution we're going to solve, the focus on. And then you're going to discover there is a go to market challenge or there is an incumbent competitor who can kill you. You're going to have to go back. But if you start with a problem and solution space, the odds of you finding a problem solution pair that's good to solve for your team is much, much higher. So you keep talking to people, and I will actually give you examples from my background into this. So I have an engineering background. I do have to put things in coordinate frames. So we talked about solution value, upside potential. We talked about technical solution risk, market segmentation, targeting risk. So clearly, whatever startup you do, if you find that problem and solution pair, it should be above that blue line, right? You're going to take a whole bunch of risk. You're going to spend a whole bunch of money. What is the upside potential? So you do need to think about it that way. And ideally, for your team, you're going to be at that number 1 point because either your team understands the market or understands the technology or both much better than the average person out there. Because if you are number 2 and there are people out there who are number 1, doesn't matter. They are ultimately going to be the people who will solve this, right? And in terms of solution value, upside potential, weighed against, I mean, some people say, oh, it doesn't matter how complicated the problem. If the solution value is huge, you will always get the necessary funding to solve that problem. I disagree with that because if that's what you believe, then go make gold out of lead. A lot of people lost their heads in the Middle Ages trying to do that, right? So we know that, we have learned that not every problem can be solved. Make sure that you find the problem solution pair that your team can address much better than anybody else. Now, typically, again, I would ask who here heard of the phrase, if you build a better mousetrap, people will come and buy it from you. And it's typically used as a negative connotation that, yeah, it's just a better mousetrap, right? Again, I'm going to look at that and I'll say, and the quote is from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and the full quote is, if a man can write a better book, preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, though he built his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. Now, in my opinion, he actually wanted to say a couple extra things, is that, and if the world is full of mice that are a pestilence, and if your mousetrap is cheaper and better in every aspect than your competitors, if you have financing for the venture, and if you can build the right team to execute, then everybody will come to your door, right? So if you start with problem solution pairs that your team can address better, then things will work. And you will not only be better than competition today, but you will also be able to build a moat to actually protect that competitive differentiation over time. So that's sort of the problem solution pair and how to position your company. Now, if we want to start sort of looking at execution, this chart to me speaks a million, right? You want to build a 100 million ARR company, you're going to get advice from all sorts of people that says, oh, look at your customer acquisition cost to customer lifetime value. It needs to be a factor of 3. They are going to talk about, oh, run a whole bunch of marketing campaigns and then measure their success. And based on that success, tweak the marketing campaign. And this picture hasn't also changed. The math, the CAC you can afford hasn't changed, right? It's true that your customer's lifetime value needs to be significantly higher than what it's costing you to acquire them. But if your customers are worth $1 million to you, you can afford flying over to them and wining and dining them and have steak dinners. You will remember all of your customer names in your head, or you will have them on speed dial in your phone. If you are in the middle, the 10,000 to 10,000 level, that's where most SaaS companies are. You can no longer afford knowing them by name or having too many meetings with them. That's when the marketing strategy you engage has to be more like product-led growth. They have to come to your website and they buy it from your website. And if you are all the way below where you're going to have 10 million customers that are going to pay you $10 a year, so you are a simple game that people are using, there is no way you can track who they are. Now, what has changed over time is if you were in that lower right corner of a bee or an amoeba, you had no choice but to sell through a channel because you were Coke, you built your distribution network, and you don't care which 100 million people are buying your Coke on a given day at Safeway or at Walmart or what have you. But what has changed is with all the billing mechanisms, with all the online shopping, you can have customers who can download your app or subscribe to your product and keep paying you $1 or $10 a month, and you can build a business. But the way you look at your business, this is a lens that you need to look at through, because your marketing strategy is going to be, your positioning strategy is going to be very different. I mean, if you are basically looking at those whales, you will never advertise during the NFL finals. Whereas if you are selling to the amoebas, sure, it makes sense because there's a good chance that a large number of people will be actually listening to the game and to the commercial, and hence you are reaching your audience. So it's all about targeting and positioning, but where you advertise, you have to think about it. I think, Jorge, you can mute yourself. So that's on the execution, but back in 96, this guy Amir Bide wrote a paper and said, as a founder, you have to ask yourself three questions. And I actually already have a couple of you who told me that you have certain core values where the startup you are building or whatever it is you are founding should make the society better or a certain set of people who are ignored better, right? Or agenda is in the climate change, so making the climate is better. So that question of what are my personal goals, that question nobody can answer for you. Whereas today with AI, maybe AI can help you plan your winning strategy, but AI can also hallucinate. So you better also know enough that you decide if that strategy is correct. And it is true. I mean, I've done that at 11 site lately. I just put all the information up and AI regurgitates things in a nice and organized way. Something that would take me a couple days to sort of wrap my head around gets done for me in a couple hours. But then I still have to make the decision of is that the right strategy? But I do want to go back to that personal goals. That is not something, forget about AI, others cannot answer for you either. Maybe you want to build $1 billion company. Maybe you want to build a life size company. That's an entirely personal choice, and there is no right or wrong. I know founders who have written in their corporate bylaws that optimizing profit is not the main goal of their company because they didn't want then some other investor come and sue him or complain to him that he could have charged more for his price. He, in fact, was trying to teach people how to read. He had built a product for that, but he wanted to position that product for people who could not afford tutors. So if that's what you're going to do, you really have to price it so that they can afford it. Now, the one thing that I do want to add, and Amir doesn't talk about that, is it's not just your personal goals. You really need to look at the team as a whole. The team as a whole must be on the same page of what the common goals are and what risks you are willing to take. If you have a team member who has a trust fund, and they are set for life and they are doing the startup just because they want to do a startup, whereas somebody else who has two kids, a mortgage, tuition payments they need to make, and their savings account has only enough money for the next 3 months. Those two people will not have the same goals, or at least they're not going to have the same risk tolerance. If you don't get that whole team on the same page with that, then sooner or later that team is going to have problems. So, how to build a team and communication is something I want to spend a couple more minutes talking about. So, hire people based on merit, right? So, just write your job description, make sure that the people qualified for that job. That's sort of your gold standard. But within that, you need to make sure that your team is diverse, right? So remember Larry Keeley's diverse skills. You need people in engineering, in business, in marketing, maybe in social sciences. Make sure they come with different cultural experiences, networks. The cultural experiences will allow you to better understand the customers. Networks will allow you to connect with more customers, investors, what have you. Make sure they have different levels of work experience because some people will be excited to do anything and everything, So those are the younger, less experienced one maybe. And then people who have more experience would prefer to advise. I don't know if you guys know Myers-Briggs personalities, extrovert, introvert. It really helps to have people with different backgrounds in there, right? Now, you guys have heard DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion. I know that they were not properly implemented because they didn't start with merit. But if you start with merit, diversity, equity, and inclusion brings you much, much further. One thing I'm going to talk about is the copier test. So that basically is you accidentally leave everybody's salaries and share package printed on the copier, right? If there is going to be a revolution in the company, you fail the test. If everybody looks at it and says, yeah, it's fair. She makes more than I do, but clearly she adds more value. So make sure it's your job as the founder CEO that you are equitable, because inevitably some people will negotiate for themselves a lot harder than others. So you do need to keep them honest. And then so long people have the merit, the motivation, the work ethics, and the positive personality, do hire anybody you can bring in. Because at the end, you will be going to war with the team you have, not with the team you want. So build the best possible team. Now, one downside of having a diverse team, different personalities, is that people aren't going to agree. That's actually a very good thing. You do not want a whole bunch of team members who are always on the same page. People need to disagree. People need to be able to disagree. So the key thing is there, people have to attack the problem, not each other. Right? Now, when you are making decisions as a team, I find that I rarely ever make any decision with 100% confidence. I'm happy if I'm 80% confident, right? So that's the best decisions we can make right now. We have made our assumptions, we're going to validate our assumptions, but this is the decision we have made. But you do need to compartmentalize. When you are executing that decision, you cannot question yourself, right? You need to execute with 120% confidence. Because if you're sort of like trying to decide how to execute, but you're not confident in your decision, you're going to get paralyzed. Sure, every couple months, have a big powwow with your team, reassess, reevaluate, see if you need to change anything strategically, change that. But when you are executing with 120% confidence. Now, another thing where a good diverse team brings to the table is if three different people who are looking at things totally differently can make that same decision with 60% confidence that this is what we should do, that team can say we have 90 plus probability this is the right decision. Because what are the odds that all three people are wrong? So that's 40% to the power of three. You can make your decisions as a team with confidence, right? Now, it's also important that if you are working in a team, you don't sort of boast that you know what you are doing. If you have only 60% confidence and if you talk as if you know what you're talking about, this is, I can tell you with 100% confidence, this is what we need to do. That's when fights break out because you can't defend that position thoroughly. And then if another teammate has like a 60% leaning into the opposite direction, and if that person can also be an overconfident dickhead and say, no, 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 this is what we need to do, they will start becoming defensive and arguing with each other. On the other hand, if they could both be open, saying, hey, I'm 60% confident. Hey, Latif, by the way, nice.
Hello, hi, Alex. Good to see you, my friend.
if you can be open about it, you can see where you diverged and then ultimately say, okay, this is the one assumption that we are making differently. So let's validate that assumption, right? And last but not least, the team needs to stay on the same page, and you need to understand how your team ticks, right? So in my first startup, everybody was young. Every other Friday, we would go and drink a beer. And that was the place where we were doing our laundry. Everybody could complain about whatever they wanted to complain. We were on the same page. But then, as the teams aged, going out every other Friday was no longer possible. During COVID, it definitely wasn't possible. So you find somebody in the company, in our case, that's Bora, who you guys are seeing, who basically has to go and talk to everybody, be jovial, and then see if there are any signals that are coming that certain people are unhappy or uneasy, right? And you do need to understand your personalities. So one example I have, and Latif's arrival couldn't be more timely. He and I, remember, I guess I told you guys in '89, I started working at Oracle. We were in the same class that Oracle hired. Back then, they would put 60 people that they hired that month into a hotel room for 3 weeks, and they trained you. And then with all the material they trained, they also wanted you to just go play games. So they had organized the softball game. The idea was that they would divide every class that they hired into two teams of 30, and there would be a softball game at the end. Now, it just happened that our class, there were plenty of Europeans. Almost half the class was European. And we are like, what the hell is softball? Why should I play softball? They couldn't get us to go out and do that. And then somebody walked into the classroom with a soccer ball, and half the class walked out. And after that, every couple of days we would go play soccer. So do understand your team, your team's personalities. If they really need a lot of cheerleading, do that. If they are a little bit more sarcastic, ironic type of people, then maybe openness is what you need to lead with. The last thing here that I want to give as an example is thinking inside and outside your head. Again, two stories that I learned this over time is in my first startup, one co-founder was a PhD friend of mine, and the other co-founder was somebody who came from the industry. So Farah, who is also the co-founder of 11 Side, we would come into the office, we would say hey to each other and go into our office and sit down and start working. Our third co-founder, Mohammed, would come, sit down, start talking to us, tell us what he had done over the weekend, chit chat, and go to his office. So we are like, Muhammad wants to tell us something. He comes, he starts talking, but he never gets to what it is that he wants to say. And eventually we talk to Muhammad, and he's like, why are you guys that terse to me? Every time you guys come in, you say hi and you go to your room. Turns out that, Muhammad's way of saying hi is, I need to talk to you for a few minutes. That's just my way of saying hi. And our way of saying hi was, hey. So after a while, you get to know each other. The other thing with Muhammad was that he would sit us down, and when we are about to make the strategic decision, he would argue we should do A, convince us we should do A, and then he would do 180 and try to convince us that we should do B. It was only afterwards that we understood that he was thinking outside his head. He was sort of using us as a sounding board that should we do this or should we do that? And I learned that thinking inside and outside your head the hard way with my second co-founder, because she definitely talked in her head. She would come to a meeting with a set position, and there was no way I could change her position in that meeting. And I learned after a while that if I basically give her my arguments, let her go home, the next day she would come in with a new position. Now, years have passed, we
102
all
is right there.
grew,
This is
and by
103.
now she
I don't
also
know. I'm
makes
sorry.
her
That's
changes
closed.
her
Yeah,
What are you
opinion.
looking for in particular? A name of something?
102, yeah.
Hey,
Alec.
JDF, I think we need you to
Sorry, I don't
mute.
know.
Yeah, no problem.
So
Hey,
understand your team members think and make sure you communicate. It goes back to attack the problem, not each other. And in all of this, time is a dimension. You must move fast, but you will find that you always have more times. Make your assumptions, validate them, move, and adjust. And along the way, you're going to have to break a lot of chicken and egg problems. But it's sort of, if you are spiraling in and if you converge, it's good. If you find you are spiraling out, you diverge, you go back and you do it again. I'm going to try to wrap up pretty quickly here so that if you have any questions, we can do that. One key thing that I see a lot of first-time founders do, especially outside Bay Area, is people are very shy about talking about their idea. You must be able to freely talk about what problem you're solving. You don't need to explain how the sausage is made and what the secret sauce is, but the problem and high-level solution description you must be able to do. And if you think that by just doing that you are giving away your value, then you either didn't have market differentiation or solution differentiation. That is not a good startup business idea for your team, right? So if you think that by talking about it, some other team can take over and do it faster, better than you, that will happen. And if you had the idea there are 8 billion people out there, they probably had it too. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. I have like another set of slides I can continue talking, but since I have been seeing this wall of names, I want to see if we can get people to turn on their video and ask a question.
Alex, my name is Mohit. I just want to know that will you share this presentation with us after this event?
Sure. I will send it to Marianne and she can then share it with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
I've got a question, Alex. Good to see you, by the way.
Yeah.
It's been a while. So, we're progressing. I think last time we met, I told you about the startup idea that I had. We've progressed quite a bit. We've got a demo. We're 2 or 3 weeks away from the prototype. So we made a lot of progress. My question for you is, are there any best practices around how to set up these equity agreements with your co-founders? I have one co-founder who is you could call him our chief product officer. And then the other person we want to bring on board is a CTO. So would love to see if you've got ideas,
Okay.
samples,
So
templates.
I actually can share with you something. I'm going to summarize it at a very high level, right? So typically, in the example Latif gives, there is a category of a bunch of people work together on building a startup, but the funding is still not there. So after two of you have worked on it for a year, you add two more people to the team, and then you get funding. So now, how are you going to divide the equity? A good rule of thumb is what you have done up to this point where you are making these agreements, that work is worth 20%, right? And then what you're going to do in the next 4 or 5 years is work 80%. So 20% of the equity you give to people based on their past contribution. 80% of the equity you're going to give to people is based on future contribution.
Okay.
Right? And then the whole thing comes together as the 100% of the equity. So you have a pool of equity, 20% gets distributed based on past, 80% from the future. It's a fair justice or like rough justice, but it's a good rule of thumb.
Right,
I have a
right.
feeling.
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
that makes a lot of sense. And so when you say 20% is based on past contribution, it's me and my co-founder, right, who have brought the company so far to the point
Yes.
where we have a working prototype. So 10% would be for me, 10% would be for my co-founder.
No, 100. Yeah. So 100% is 50% is for you, 50% is for your co-founder, and 20% would be as 10-10.
Right.
And then the remaining bucket, if you're going to be the CEO, you still can get 20%, 10% of that bucket. So you two will be in both buckets. The new people you are adding are only in the future bucket.
Okay, all right. And then you've also got to, of course, keep in mind they're going to be raising, and so there's
So
the
that's afterwards. That's all afterwards. This is like initial founder pool that you are allocating. Then you get basically investors are going to take some and you're going to put aside for option pool for people. And this equation also works because maybe the three of you started, one of you is not going to join the company. Right? They got an offer from some other external company. They brought you here, but they're not going to join the company. So they can get something for the past contribution, will be on the cap table. They are also going to be supportive. New people are on the new one.
Okay.
Aaron,
Makes
do you have
sense.
a question? I trust you do.
Yeah, hi, Alex. I do. That in the experience that I've had, that number 20% seems very low for a working prototype, pre-revenue, pre-funding. I just haven't met many people that have quote unquote founded a company and then hired on co-founders that are willing to take that small a piece of the pie. And then the other issue is sort of, the primary founder adding people on later on, and this clash of, like you mentioned about the Myers-Briggs, this clash of identities and personalities, and oftentimes the concept of the primary founder being the my baby attitude, very micromanaging, not really releasing power, but also making high level demands like it's his or their company, and they're just adding these people on it. Oh, well, I'll give you 20%. And now you've got a 65-20 plus an employee pool of 10 or 15.
No. Put the employee pool all outside this. We are the
Yeah,
founders. There are 100 shares we are distributing. 20
right.
shares are going to go to past contribution, 80 for the future. So the founder that built the MVP, if they are staying with the company, maybe they get the large chunk of the 20%, maybe 15 of that 20 goes to them. But off that 80, they can also take another 25, 30 because they are also essential to the future of the company,
Hmm.
right? But
Yeah,
if they build the MVP and they're going to hand off to some other team to actually make it happen, then yeah, they don't have a good argument.
right. But I see most founding, either like two co-founders or one co-founder, taking 65 to 80% of the company and then offering out 10 or 20 to subsequent quote unquote late co-founders, for a lack of a better name.
Okay, so that's probably not fair. Then it's up to the late co-founders to decide whether they want to join or not. Now, if the initial co-founders have actually gotten funding in, that's a very different story. I mean, if I have actually two of us, we have done this, we have brought the money in, and we are now hiring people, that's option pool set of numbers. You are a VP, you get 1% of the company. That's it.
Yeah,
If
no,
that.
these are pre-revenue, pre-funded companies that I'm
Yeah.
referring to primarily. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I think Agneta has a question.
Yeah. Yeah, I had some conversations with one startup in Sweden that the co-founder had one co-founder had such a large degree and was not active any longer, that the venture funds or the investors didn't want to invest until that was corrected. So I guess you have to think about what happened, you know, in the past, and then some thoughts on will this added co-founder stay for the future and how long?
Yeah.
And,
No, because I mean, it is entirely possible that 3 PhD students on campus start the company. 2 of them will stay. The third one will go become a professor somewhere.
yeah, exactly.
So you need to recognize the contribution of that third one, motivate them to be with the company, support you, but the value is really going to be created in the next 4 years. So that 5-year time frame of the first year and the remaining 4 years. So if you stay with the company, of course, you're going to get a large chunk of the 80% too. Other questions? So it all goes back to, you know, making sure that you have a team, you have the common goals and common risks. So the founding team needs to be on the same page. Other questions?
Hi.
Hi, Shiva.
So I was wondering, I know that there's like the 4-year vesting period, but let's say there's multiple founders and one of the founders doesn't exactly leave the company, but they're not gonna, let's say, fully be working and pulling as much weight. Then how do you deal with that if there's no board yet?
I mean, so if you are clearly leaving and not going to do anything, that's pretty
No,
clear.
let's say
If you're
let's say
going to
they're
be
not they're not
50%, if you're going to be 50%, then, you know, your value is 50% based on your position. If you're going to be helping a day a week or occasionally, again, your value moving forward is proportional to that time you're going to be putting in.
So do you change the agreement at that point? Like, let's say they worked for, let's say you were working 50-50 for a year, and then the other person starts a family year 2, and then they're like, oh, you know what? I don't want to be all in on this.
So ideally, you had vesting agreements.
Yeah. So like what if they're gonna keep working, but they're not gonna be pulling
I
this
mean,
thing
this
out?
actually did happen to me. So my co-founder, we talked about this at the beginning. That was not the plan, and then they were expecting. So we basically took the 3 years of vesting remaining for her. She got 1 year of it. I got 1 year of it. 1 year of it we put in the option pool. And she actually left. And then later on, she came back as VP of marketing and got more shares. Right? But if somebody was going to be there for the next 4 years, has vested their first year, but they're only going to go part-time, they will be paid and they will only vest part-time.
So do you change the agreements, or is that normal to have something like that in the agreement that like if you're not fully
I mean, no, you had a vesting agreement, right? So that vesting agreement was based on full-time employment. If you are not going to be full-time, you're going to have to change it,
got it?
right? And you cannot day one plan for every possible outcome, right? So, I mean, at some point there needs to be enough trust among the founders that when these things do happen, you can figure them out.
What if they're still full-time, they're still putting in 40 hours, but like you're putting in 80 hours?
So one person is putting twice as much as the others.
Okay, so legally you have
So
to go.
that's the math.
Yeah.
I mean, or it could be that the person who's putting in 40 hours is doing 5 times as much work than the person who's there 80 hours, right? So it's the amount of time, it's also amount of value.
I have a quick question which actually follows Shiva's question. Are there any best practices that one can follow to track the productivity contribution in terms of time and actually, intellectually investing in the product that we're building? I think it's not just the number of hours that comes into picture, especially in a
Correct.
startup. It's future-proofing the product, it's thinking ahead, be team management. There's a lot of things involved in it. So would you be able to share some best practices there, please?
So the slide I went to is sort of the best practice. Whatever it is where you can converse openly with each other, go have a beer, talk about it, right? Put some time aside where you guys can all get on the same page.
Unfortunately, since most of the teams are virtual now, we never get to meet people. It's just that, we get to know each other on some forums and we start working together only to know the other side of the personality.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, you guys need to either travel or make some time to just talk online. I know how hard it is, but that's
Okay, thank you. I understand.
right. But there is no other solution other than keeping all the founders on the same page with their core values, the meet the company goals and everything, right?
Yeah, thanks.
You need to start with founders with the same core values, same goals. You need to keep them on it. You need to expand the team. You need to keep the team on the same page. And as a founder CEO, that's your job. And some founder CEOs personalities are not most suited for that. Make sure that the founding team has a person whose personality is most suited to it, and that person makes sure that everybody is talking.